Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you back up here into the loft on Weir Yard. Now today I thought I would take a look at something which I've been asked a few times over to do a video on, and that is appropriate locomotives that are available ready to run with the Hornby pre-grouping coaches. Now that's the range of 4 and 6 wheelers that we did review on the channel. Actually a couple of times we reviewed the original samples that came from Hornby, and then when the production ones did reach the shops I got quite a few of those because they really did press all the right buttons. I do love a nice shiny pre-grouping livery, but a lot of people have been asking me what appropriate locomotives there are to run with these. So today, come with me and let's take a look at what's available ready to run to match up with the Hornby pre-grouping coaches. When Hornby introduced the range of the pre-grouping coaches, there was much excitement. For quite a few years we've had a number of really quite pretty pre-grouping locomotives that have been available from pretty much all the major manufacturers. The trouble was that they didn't give us anything much to run with them. Well, Hornby were the first to really solve this problem with a full package of coaches. Now these are, as we explained in the video where we reviewed these, a little bit more generic in design. In fact, actually, the design of these coaches is very, very heavily influenced by the Stroudley coaches of the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. But beggars can't be choosers, and the liveries that these have come out in really are sublime, and they do encapsulate a lot of the generic sense of that pre-grouping period, with the ornate wooden panelling, the lining, and just that kind of feel of a coach that would be suitable to run with any of these railway companies. As we explained in the original video, a lot of these coaches during the pre-grouping period were built in very, very small batches, and the designs varied quite a lot. But there were certain things that were fairly similar between them, and that's what Hornby has managed to kind of capture with these. So I've got 5 different pre-grouping liveries here, and I know that Hornby did also release them in BR Crimson, Southern Railway Olive Green and LNWR teak panelling as well, but the main scope of this really is looking for the pre-grouping locomotives suitable to run with these, so I will leave those other coaches for another day. Also missing from this quintet is the North British Railway example. I don't actually have any of those, but it is something that is on my radar for some time in the future. What I actually concentrated with these were some of the liveries that really did go with locomotives I either currently have or that are forthcoming from manufacturers. So first up, I'm going to just put to one side the Great Northern Railway, the London and North Western Railway, the London and South Western Railway, and the Great Western Railway, and we're going to instead concentrate on the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. It is quite an austere livery in a great many respects. We've got this kind of brown colour, reddy brown, and then we've got the rather subtle lining. But the locomotives were quite different from this, and it is something that actually I do find quite interesting with the pre-grouping period, is that often the locomotives were very, very different from the rolling stock liveries that they pulled. So for London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, the locomotive choice ready to run is actually quite large, and it's one of the reasons why I think the LBSCR coaches have sold incredibly well. First up, I'm going to show you Bachmann's E4. Available in London, Brighton and South Coast Railway liveries number 579. Strangely enough, this wasn't the fastest selling of locomotives at the time, and I remember these being kind of reduced a little bit just to get them out through the door. And in a way that's quite a shame, because This is a great model, and the livery that it carries here really does suit this locomotive. And I suppose part of the problem was not having anything for them to pull. But of course, that has now completely changed. And as a small 062 tank locomotive, these are probably the kinds of locomotives that would be more likely to be seen in charge of the 4 and 6 wheel coaches. But that's not the only locomotives that are available ready to run, and we have in many ways been spoilt by numerous different offerings. I have here the all-new tooled Hornby Terrier in the guise here of Leadenhall, and this is something as well which are more than suitable to pull these coaches. We've got there the improved engine green. It's not green, it's ochre. But I think it's probably a bit of an in-joke really, that. But certainly you can see different locomotives. These probably even more suited for pulling this kind of period of coaches. These were probably the most long-lasting class of locomotives, and they've been put out in a number of different suitable liveries. Also here we've got Brighton, another Hornby example. And then finally I bring in here Box Hill, which is the locomotive that is still preserved at the National Railway Museum. And this particular locomotive is from the Dapol Rails of Sheffield stable. Now, this improved engine green is the earlier livery. This livery that you see here on the E4 is the later livery, because of course liveries did change over the lifespan of these companies. Now, the Terrier did ultimately, the ones that survived, did ultimately get this livery, but as far as I'm aware, the only example of the modern versions, the high detail locomotives, that have been released in that livery is from Rails and Dapol that did Gypsy Hill in the LBSC sort of brown livery, and that actually sold out incredibly quickly. So I really do hope that that does get reissued, maybe a different locomotive in that livery from the Terrier fleet that survived long enough to carry it. But of course, London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, we have been spoiled. And I'm going to bring in here now the H1 Atlantic. So I'm just going to put this down here. And La France is again another locomotive. I talk about this a lot. One of my favourite locomotives. They have also done, or it's Bachmann that said this, but they've also done the H2 Atlantic, which I do have, but I've not got out because outwardly they look very similar to this. So we are spoilt for choice. In my fleet alone, we've got 6 London and Brighton and South Coast Railway locomotives from 5 different, at least subtly different between the H1 and H2 classes, all suitable really to work with these coaches, although it has to be said that the larger tender locomotives would most likely have pulled the later bogie stock. But, you know, a bit of modeller's license, these are after all generic coaches. But that there is the ready-to-run London, Brighton and South Coast Railway locomotives suitable for these coaches. Next up, I've brought in the Great Western Railway livery. And you have to be very careful with Great Western Railway because not all that is Great Western is suitable for pre-1923 Great Western. And it has to be said that the manufacturers do tend to major on that Era 3 post-1923 Great Western Railway. The GWR was the only company that persisted from the pre-grouping period, rather than being amalgamated with others to form an all-new company, which is what happened for the other 3 major grouping companies. The GWR absorbed others, particularly the Cambrian Railway. But you've got to be very careful because some of the pre-grouping liveries did persist. You know, they didn't all just get painted just for the heck of it in 1923. But it can often be an incredible minefield. Now, in the livery that Hornby have presented this is pre-grouping. So we've got the GWR monogram logo, and that is always a really easy way of telling. When it comes to suitable locomotives, we're actually not quite as well off as you might think with these, but there have been some, and the City of London, also produced for the National Railway Museum, a City of Truro, has certain versions, not all, be careful, but certain versions which are suitable to go with these coaches. Now, I've brought out here City of London in the GWR monogram crest livery, and you can see with all this ornate lining, this is suitable for that pre-grouping period and matches up with these coaches. It's the same monogram crest that we've got on both of them. And actually, the thing I like about these is the livery on this period of the GWR locomotives really does look great, and it is complementing this livery as well. The colours do go together ever so well. So if you can find the match between the locomotives, it really is a great one to go for. Now, there were other locomotives ready to run, which the actual locomotive is suitable for that pre-grouping period. But I've not seen any in the livery that is suitable, or at least that I can verify as suitable. So, you know, we've got even things like the 72XX tank locomotives. I'm not 100% sure that the liveries that have been carried on that model as released from Hornby are actually suitable. The City class, though, from Bachmann has come out in a number of different liveries, and believe it or not, this is actually also suitable for pre-grouping. This is the First World War khaki livery, and we've got the Great Western spelt out on the tender, and that does give a little bit of a clue as to some of the other liveries that might be worth researching further, that perhaps persisted across that 1923 date in time, which was suitable for before as well as afterwards. But manufacturers do tend to lump these all together as being era 3, when actually some are suitable for era 2 to 3. And I really would like to see manufacturers really get on board with being a little bit more accurate with liveries that straddle these different arbitrary eras, actually showing us that they are suitable for that. Because I think from a modeller's perspective, that liveries on the Great Western Railway that straddle era 2 to 3 really would help the later period pre-grouping modelers. But as you can see, we're not really spoilt with GWR locomotives, but what we do get are very, very pretty indeed. Now, I don't have an example of the North British Railway coaches, but I am going to mention this because the J36 has appeared as moored in the North British livery. But be careful with this, because this livery is as applied in preservation, not an actual working livery from pre-1923. However, if you're going to overlook some of the generic aspects of the coaches, then I think that this locomotive does bear mention as suitable for those North British Railway coaches. And I think that that goes some way to explain Hornby's thinking in releasing that livery, was that they knew that the J36 was out there, and we may yet see another run of the J36 in a livery more suitable. However, I believe that the J36 was rebuilt during the LNWR period, and that does mean that without some changes in tooling, it is not strictly accurate. But hey, when did that ever stop the ready-to-run manufacturers? And I, for one, would applaud a release of this model in a North British Railway livery to complement those coaches. London and South Western Railway. Now, this has a very, very peculiar, to my eyes, livery. We've got this salmon pink, and you don't often see pink on rolling stock. Certainly not unless it's red that's been very, very faded. But this is the colour they were supposed to be, with the chocolate brown lower and this salmon pink upper, just picked out with a slightly darker, almost reddy pink for the lining. It is a very eye-catching livery, and it is a marked contrast to the locomotives of the period that were suitable to pull these. First up, we've got the National Railway Museum edition of the M7 tank locomotive. Here is number 245 in London and South Western Railway liveried green. Now, there are at least 2 different versions of the London and South Western Railway green, and we will come to some of these in a bit because I do have some more locomotives to show you. But this is a really, really fine model in this later, super detailed tooled version. What I will warn you, though, is that DCC fitting these, it's not impossible, this is DCC fitted, but be prepared to have to do some mods to this locomotive to get it DCC fitted, even though it is sold as DCC ready. Hornby, do take note, just because it's got an 8-pin socket, if you don't give people enough room to put the decoder in, it's not really DCC ready. But that's by the by. But that certainly is a fine locomotive to match up with these coaches. Now I'm going to bring in from a completely different manufacturer. This is Dapol, and we've got the London and South Western Railway B4 dock tank. Now, strictly speaking, these probably wouldn't have worked trains with these, but some were used as station pilots, so you could argue that they may have been employed in shunting some of these coaches at stations. And Dapol have produced number 91 in this really quite attractive London and South Western Railway livery, which is very distinct from the liveries that those that worked at Southampton Docks wore, and it does mark this apart as being a locomotive that potentially will match up with these coaches. The final London and South Western Railway locomotive that I'm going to be showing you here now is the T9 Greyhound. Now, this green does look very, very light. Now, a lot of people have argued over this online. I've been looking at some of the people's comments on this, saying that it's a bit too light. But actually, this is the preserved livery, and you've got to be careful, a bit like when we talked about Maud, that J36, that in preservation, the liveries carried weren't necessarily completely accurate to the original pre-grouping liveries. But again, generic coaches, so I think we can get away with this. And whilst it has to be said that the T9 again would probably have been more likely to be found working bogie coach services, it's not unreasonable to believe that for whatever reason they could have been pressed into service to pull the 4 and 6 wheelers. In fact, actually, I think Hornby have only produced the 4 wheelers in London and South Western Railway. I'm not entirely certain whether there can be any 6 wheelers, but we'll wait and see. So there you have it. We've got 3 different ready-to-run locomotives from 2 different manufacturers, Hornby and Dapol, suitable to work with these coaches. And it's really interesting to see that the greens from the locomotives is markedly different from the browns and pinks of the coaching stock. When it comes to the London and North Western Railway livery, Hornby have produced some really nice examples in both 4 and 6 wheel forms, and they really do look something special. I'd go as far as saying that these are my favourite of the pre-grouping liveries released so far. However, what is unusual is that Hornby don't actually do any locomotive that I'm aware of ready to run that is suitable to pull these. So in that respect, it is a bit of a strange choice. But don't fear, there are locomotives out there suitable to pull these. I don't have any of them, and so I'm going to run through. We've got the Webb coal tank in London and North Western Railway livery, which is a very austere livery, plain black with a red number plate on it, and it's quite honestly, it's a freight only livery, very austere, and such a marked contrast to this very ornate panelling. There's also a Robinson 8K in that London and North Western Railway livery. Those are still available. In fact, we'll find a link for you. We've got a link to Rails of Sheffield that do still have them in stock, but again, not a locomotive that you would readily associate with pulling these coaches. But what is forthcoming is the improved precedent class locomotives like Hardwick. This is a collaboration between the National Railway Museum, Rails of Sheffield and Bachmann, and those really will be something special. Now, we've got an affiliate link down below which takes you through for those, and do be aware that they are selling incredibly well, so you might want to get your orders in, and there is a London and North Western Railway liveried version available from Rails of Sheffield, and then also the preserved Hardwick is available from the National Railway Museum, so you have a choice of 2 to match up with these coaches. But I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to show you this, and this is the Bachmann 242 Aspinall Radial in Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway livery. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's a completely different railway company. But in 1922, the Lancashire and Yorkshire and the London and North Western Railway amalgamated. So they kind of preempted the grouping in 1923. So there's a very narrow window where you could argue for Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway liveried locomotives pulling London and North Western Railway stock. And the Aspinall Radial actually is probably exactly the kind of locomotive that would pull these. Now, number 1008 has actually been released twice by the National Railway Museum in this very attractive livery with the Lancashire and Yorkshire spelled out in an arc, and then exactly the same livery but without that Lancashire and Yorkshire. I've actually got both, but I've pulled this one out because it's my favourite of the two. And I'm showing you this as an example of a locomotive that is out there in numbers, suitable for running with the London and North Western Railway Hornby coaches. The final livery that I have here to show you is the Great Northern Railway teak finish. Now, outwardly incredibly similar to the London and North Eastern Railway liveried versions, which presumably were just a continuation of this livery with a change in lettering. But to be strictly accurate for the Great Northern Railway period, what have we got ready to run to go with these? Well, from the National Railway Museum and Bachmann, we do have the Ivet Atlantic. Now the coal load's just fallen out there because I've got it on its side. But this is an appropriate livery. And again, the teak finish on the coaches works incredibly well with this green, the Doncaster apple green. And actually you could change the GNR for LNER and the livery pretty much does remain the same. But these were available from the National Railway Museum, and I believe that there's also a version, different running number from Bachmann in Great Northern Railway livery, both of which eminently suitable for this coach. Now, Hornby in the past have produced the N2 tank, which is an old former Airfix tooling, getting a bit long in the tooth, but that has turned up in Great Northern Railway livery as well. And I believe there's also, I think it's a J52, I'm dredging from the back of my memory, but that is firmly in the railroad camp. So there are locomotives out there if you're not quite so fussed about fidelity, but certainly for me, the highlight of the ready-to-run locomotives that are available is the Ivet Atlantic to match up with this really quite exquisite Great Northern Railway teak effect coach. And it is something that Hornby do exceptionally well. Now, we had the LNER Gresley coaches first to appear with this finish, and they really have gone from strength to strength with that, and they've used those skills to really make this quite a special livery as well. So there you have my quick guide to ready-to-run pre-grouping locomotives suitable to match up with the Hornby ready-to-run pre-grouping generic 4 and 6 wheel coaches. Well, I hope you found that video informative. Don't forget to tickle that like button and also subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so, and ring the bell and tick all notifications to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. And until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. See you then. Bye for now. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMR-ish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Graham Foster, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, and Mo Henry. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.